Hello everybody. In this video I'm going to be covering MVC. So first, what is MVC? Well, MVC is a web application architecture. Though not exclusive to web apps, it's come into common use from frameworks such as Ruby on Rails, Django, and Laravel. Now, why are so many frameworks using this? And why should you need to know it for your web application career or web development uh, uh, programming? So the reason why you would want to use this is because it's a field tested and very common architecture. So it's not too hard to understand for most people. And in general, there's not too many problems that can happen. There are some drawbacks, which I'll get to. But this is going to just cover the basics of what's going on. So, the first thing is of course you have a user. He's going to request, let's say, the home page of your application. How is this going to work in an MVC? Well, the router is the first thing that sort of gets called, and this is sort of just an underlying assumption of MVC, is that when you're using HTTP or when you're trying to render HTML, you're going to be calling a web server, whether that's nginx or Apache web server or something else. That's what's going to get called first. Now, there should actually be two arrows between the router and the view, but in this case, and I mean so in this direction and the other direction, but here we have it, go send a request to the router, and the router says, okay, now what controller do I have to call? So it matches the request. So let's say we request /home, or that's kind of a silly route, or /contact us on this website. Well, if you did it in MVC, you would have a contact us controller or page controller, or whatever controller for that route. And so each route typically has its own controller, which inherits from a base controller, which is a general view, or general abstraction for certain logical portions of handling the web application request. And so what's involved in that process is that the request can be a simple HTTP request, it can be a JSON request, etc. So the controller takes that data and figures out what to do with that data. So you have to implement that logic yourself, but that is being done in the controller. So the controller is going to be interacting heavily with the model, but the view is going to determine as well what happens to the model, because you can send queries in the template. Some languages allow you to do that. Some have more of a strict, some frameworks have more of a strict definition for what a view is. And so typically a view is a template. It's going to give certain directives, and it's going to be the presentation of the layout of your web application. So the controller is using that view and rendering it or returning it as a response. So if your view is an HTML file, okay, that gets served to the user, then that HTML file may have certain variables, right? And those variables are fetched from the controller, the controller plugs those values into the view to then be rendered back to the user. As a response. So sending a request and returning or receiving a response. That's what the user is going to be doing on his browser. And so this typically is done with HTML documents on the more traditional web, but more recently we're starting to get into front-end web applications that are written in more complicated frameworks like Angular and so on, which are mainly interacting with JSON, which is very common nowadays. So the view in that case would be returning JSON rather than an entire web app. So most web applications still, when you go page to page, it reloads the entire web app, but this is, changing. So this is kind of the more traditional, more tested route for web apps, is doing this kind of MVC style. Again, most frameworks differ in some aspects of how they implement this, but that should give you a decent overview of what these frameworks do and why the MVC paradigm is so so ubiquitous and so commonly used and understood. So again, I hope that gives everyone who's watching a decent overview. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm going to be covering this in more detail in videos to come. So thanks for watching. Please give it a like and subscribe.